I'm gonna do that right now. General, thank you very much. What I thought we would do, if this is okay with everybody, and I apologize for my voice. In general, I have a big favor to ask of you.
Okay.
If any of my fellow members laugh at my voice, could you audit them?
Give me the authority to audit the General Assembly, and I'll gladly do it. I think you co-sponsored the bill. Yeah.
There we go. I probably shouldn't have brought that up. Anyway.
Yeah. Look, you asked, right? I'll consider that an invitation.
See what happens when you get to be elderly. What I would like to do is just mention right off, as a number of the members have a voting meeting that came up last minute with state government. So as many of us will stay as we possibly can. We are taping this, so we'll put it in as part of a financial rescue caucus. Right. And for the other members' purposes, and again, please forgive my voice, what I asked the Auditor General to do is specifically ask the Auditor General to focus on broad systemic concerns about financial stability of the Commonwealth, risk that he is concerned about, what focus the Auditor General staff is seeing that we should be aware of, material weaknesses, if any, that may be apparent in audits, and what I like to call the things that keep you awake at night. So with that, why don't we go ahead and I'd ask the other members to introduce themselves so you know who's here.
Sure, absolutely.
Thanks. Chris.
Thank you, General. Representative Chris Dush, Jefferson, Indiana County, the 66th District.
Jared Solomon, 202nd Philadelphia.
Good morning, Jonathan Fritz, 111th District. That's Wayne and Susquehanna counties.
Right.
Pam DeLisio, the 194th, Philadelphia and Montgomery counties.
Brett Miller, 41st District, Lancaster County.
Judy Ward, Blair County.
Great to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Dave Zimmerman,
General, would you like to go ahead and start with your testimony? You have some prepared remarks.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. I'll go through this quickly. First of all, I do apologize. It was yesterday evening where I look at my kid's schedule and I see my son has baseball practice at 6 a.m. and then it hits me to ask my daughter, how in God's name are you getting to school tomorrow? Because I'm supposed to be here. And she goes, Ben rides me every day. I said, I know, but not when he has baseball practice at 6 a.m. And she goes, oh, well, then you'll ride me. I said, and so hence the rain and that, so here I am. So most of you have probably had some similar type of story like that. I have some prepared. I know we've probably sent you over some information. I'm going to go through this sort of in a broad context because I know some other issues I want to get to questions. Systemically over the Commonwealth, we audit all the state spending. There's sort of three different categories that I think really keep me awake at night. But I think there's a broader question that the state needs to ask itself. And that is, first of all, what are our priorities? And the priorities should be funded appropriately. And then if something isn't a priority, we should get rid of it or find some other entity to do it. So for starters, and so when I say we audit public schools, and we see all over the map with our public schools, some that are very well run, but in very strong, deep financial straits, some because of the wealth of the area, maybe are doing okay financially, even with incompetence, and everywhere in between. So from a state perspective, you take like Stowe Rocks and Aliquippa School District. The management of those two school districts are actually doing about everything they can do, but their tax base is so deteriorated that there's literally, they're left with either, and I'm going to be clear about this, there's no more property tax for them to tax. Like they're literally in a situation where there's nothing else they can get out of the district. But they're actually well run, meaning they're not making mistakes. But then on the other hand, you have the Scranton School District that decides to do a no-bid contract with a local vendor and pays $4 million above the Pennsylvania Department of Education transportation formula. And now because of that, they're potentially going to have not only a property tax increase, but also furloughing teachers and cutting programs for kids. And apparently their school board was so responsive to the audit that one of them said the only thing this audit is worth is toilet paper, which my response was going to be, well, you don't even know that all our audits are electronic now. But they're so burying their heads in the sand, the older board. Now, there's a lot of people that beat them and they're taking a better approach. Point is, like, That is a problem when you have literally that type of disparity in Pennsylvania, where you have a well-run district, but they literally can't pay their bills because of the deteriorating tax base. But then on the other hand, you have another district that decides to do a no-bid contract and pay $4 million above the school formula and screwing the kids in the process. That literally, I mean, we can sometimes in politics, sometimes, you go to the microphone, that literally drives me crazy. And so I start off with what's a way to fix that? I think every school district should have to bid their transportation contract. We have found, since I've been Auditor General, $60 million in waste in school transportation costs, $60 million. 56 of that $60 million comes from 19 districts, $4 million from 481. What's the common denominator? The 481 bid their contract. The 19 that caused $56 million in waste don't bid their contract. I mean, you don't have to be a nuclear physicist to figure that one out. I mean, that to me is pretty clear. You bid your contract, you get a better deal. So, but how we fund our schools and the management and the whole system, that keeps me away. But it's not just a financial issue. I get that. There's also a management issue. But there's a financial risk to the Commonwealth from that. That's A. Second issue, and I still think this is one of the most stunning statements that will never be a book or a movie in the history of government officials. Sandusky happens, and the state updates its child protection laws for all the right reasons. And I'm not here to condemn that. The Department of then Public Welfare, now Department of Human Services, gives the legislature, at the legislature's request, a fiscal note. It goes to where now I coach American Legion Baseball. If anybody in this room wants to be my scorekeeper for American Legion Baseball, you have to pass a background check. You want to sell a hot dog stand? And again, I'm not mad about this. You have to pass a background check. So it goes from this small group of people that have to go through a background check to literally thousands. And the Department of Public Welfare told the legislature in a fiscal note that that would have zero fiscal impact on the Commonwealth. Perhaps the biggest, and I want to say, I'm thinking state level, obviously, Bay of Pigs was probably more dramatic. But from a financial sentiment, I can't think of a more inaccurate statement. Counties have had to raise taxes just to hire new staff, just to deal with the child protection. And we audit all the CYSs. We've done the State of the Child report. We've audited the child line with 58,000 unanswered phone calls. The counties are now treading water at best, and at worst, drowning, simply because they can't keep up with everything of what they have to do to protect the children in Pennsylvania. And so that keeps me up at night. Then you combine that with what's happened the last couple of years with our budgets. And look, obviously we know there's a constitutional requirement of passing a balanced budget. That goes without saying. But the can has been kicked down the road so many times with duct tape and borrowing to patch this hole, to patch that hole, that now Wall Street, whether we like it or not, is downgrading Pennsylvania. Now, you go down, walk down Main Street anywhere in Pennsylvania and say, kids aren't getting protected. The average person, liberal, moderate, conservative, they'll get ticked off about that. School taxes going up, they'll get ticked off about that. Say our credit is getting downgraded, that may not necessarily be the biggest soundbite in the history of American politics, but it is costing us money. It makes it more expensive to fix bridges, for us to do school district financing, and that's taking money out of the pockets of average Pennsylvanians without them knowing it. And I've called the credit downgrades the biggest backdoor tax increase on the people of Pennsylvania, and it's happened over the last couple years now. So those three broad categories, what's happening in our schools, what's happening with our children, and then the broader credit downgrading that's leading to impacts on infrastructure and school district, those three things, they do keep me awake. at night. I'll say, certainly when the Steelers lose a playoff game, you're so ramped up you don't sleep that night. But then the Eagles win, and then you get ramped up, and then you don't sleep that night. So there's a pro and con to all these sports events. But if you want to know, like, the problem that the state is facing right now is real. And independent analysts that look at our state finances are concerned about the direction of our state. And one final thing, and I don't have an answer for this, and the budget office doesn't, and I don't think anyone in the legislature does, but we need to figure this out. Over the last several years, the state's economy has been growing, not as fast as we like, but it has been growing. But the revenue has been stagnant, relatively speaking. And I think we have to ask ourselves, is our tax system really prepared for the new economy? Or do we have to analyze what maybe needs to get cut or shifted, because what the economy was in 1985, which is where our tax system is really based on, may not be appropriate for today. And I think I don't have an answer for it, but I think it's something we have to think through. So with that, think school financing, how we, protect our kids at the county level, long-term structural debt, and certainly the pension issue. You combine all of those together, and the state has some real long-term financial challenges while also meeting our core obligations. And those are the things that worry me that we found through our audits.
General, if I could just ask you one question, I'll open to anybody else. And again, please forgive my voice. I was really impressed with the quality of your staff and the great job you all have done, and thank you very much for that. With the one bill that was passed about the requirements for the 120-day response to the audits, I had an intern go through and look at all of your audits, and we found $800 million worth of recommendations that your team has made. So the people who don't think that the Auditor General's staff comes up with tremendous ways of identifying quality information that, if enacted, can significantly improve the budget posture, it's a mistake. So the question I would ask you is, from what you see with the system of internal controls within the different, like the school districts and the municipal agencies and the state government, any areas that you think need to be tightened up?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the $800 million, because you rounded up a little bit. We're in the $700 million category, to be precise, and my team gets very nervous when I say, hey, look, I'm in politics. We can round that up a little bit. I mean, every guy that's 5'10 and a half lives 5'11 in the program. I mean, whoever says rounds it down, I mean, you heard them. We can round that up. They get very nervous. I'm like, it's 765. We can go up there.
I've actually got the spreadsheet on it if you'd like to see it. It's $812 million.
Yeah. We should round down. That's safer. No, and because, that's what we do, right?
I was going to round it up to $1 billion.
While we're talking, nearly $1 trillion.
Sure, absolutely.
So on the internal controls, I would say I'm going to go 3 areas. I do think at our school district level, and by the way, 80% of our school district audits, they do fine. Like you never read about them, they're fine. But I do think that in some districts, we have to worry about the quality of maybe the business management officials, how they bid things out. When they do a school building project, I think there are ways that we can look to, even if necessary, and a lot of times the school may need renovated or sometimes a new school, but how they go about that contract, I think there's a lot of people that have figured out ways to sort of make some extra money at the school districts, whether it be the architects, the construction, contractor management, how they do the bidding, and certainly I've been pretty clear on what I think about the transportation costs. So I think those are all areas, and I don't want this to be a blanket condemnation. Most school districts do fine, but there is this 20% that drive a lot of these extra costs. And then the problem is, once a school district like Scranton digs themselves in this hole, then they're going to end up in financial recovery, and what's going to happen? The state's going to have to take it over, and then it's everyone's responsibility. So we've got to figure out something, whether it's just on the school transportation or some broader issue where local voters need to have more say on maybe some of the bigger ticket items. I don't necessarily think, the day-to-day grind of who mows the lawn in the school district should be up for a referendum. But some of these issues, I do think that there needs to be more local say. So I leave it at that. But the transportation, that's my big issue.
Okay.
When you're 60 million over, and 56 of the 60 million are because of 19 districts that don't competitively bid their contract, that's a problem. So I start there. Second, on the internal control, how all of our municipalities pick financial managers for all these pension funds. I mean, how many people, look, when a school board wants to raise taxes, it's like a Beatles concert around that school building sometimes, Beatles reunion concert. Think about sometimes when we have a big town hall about a big ticket item. How many people have ever said, you know, I was at that pension board meeting, and man, that was fascinating. I
would too. I would too.
I'm talking, no, I mean, not you, but like how many times have you been walking down the street and you saw somebody in the grocery store? They may ask you about property taxes. Yeah, there's things, I know what I get hit on when I go to the grocery store, and it's never municipal pensions. The financial impact.
Absolutely.
Of not having good quality managers. Remember, our unfunded liability at the municipal level is $10 billion. $10 billion. And I'll bet you there are people that are on some of those pension boards that don't even know who their fund managers are. And we only found one municipality, and that was the Erie firefighters, who actually every year call their fund managers to account to make sure they're meeting their benchmarks, and if they don't, they fire them. One, the Erie firefighters.
Wow.
Now, I'm not saying, again, everyone's bad, but that was the only time, because I've been all over the state. We audit every municipal pension fund. That was the only time that anybody said, yeah, every year we have all of our fund managers in. We make sure they're meeting their benchmarks. If they don't, we fire them. Only one. And so all those fees that we're spending, and sometimes you got to ask, what are we getting for that? And you may say, well, that's not my responsibility. If a municipality can't pay their pension debt and they go under, and I know, Representative, you've been working on this issue, guess what? That becomes a state problem overnight. So that's an area I think, maybe it's putting more municipalities in the Pennsylvania municipal system itself where, and I'm going to give you an example, or I'll end on this. The average fee for the ones that are in the state system, again, you don't merge the pension plans, but you have a state manager of the municipal pension. The average fee structure in there is $250 to $300 per member per year. Reading pays $4,000 per member per year, and they don't meet their benchmarks.
And following up on that, and
Sure.
the very specific window of the municipal pension managers, is it possible, in reflecting on our municipalities, they're normally really good local guys that want to do good for the community, and that's a realm that they just don't understand. Do you feel that, could your office maybe set some expectations that if we were able to give to the municipality, hey, these are 5 things you should check to make sure that you're meeting, these are 5 minimum standards for benchmark, and then here's the bigger state option. Some tools that, like the farmers in my community, they're thinking of how they're changing their transmission after the meeting. They're not thinking of the bond manager, or even know the questions to ask. I wouldn't know those questions.
Now, without trying to be too weird about this, my Jedi powers, this is where I sense the staff gets nervous because they're worried about what is technically pre-audit advice. See, I can already sense the worry about this. That pre-audit advice makes them very nervous. These are things that keep auditors up at night, and pre-audit advice.
That's correct.
But what we've done in other areas, and I think we can think about finding a way to thread this needle, is what we do is we've done this with school districts, and the ones that have watched this video have said that it's really helped them, is we put together a little video or DVD, and we put it online and we make it available to all the municipalities. And we basically say, here's some of the best practices of what we found in our previous audits. And here's some of the common mistakes. And that way it gets us out of saying, because this is where we can't go, and Chairman Ryan would know this, I can't go into, West Manheim, township in York County and just say, you should hire this fund manager because they're really good. because that, in a sense, is telling you if you'll get a clean audit if you hire them. But what we can do is we can put together some of the common mistakes and the things that have worked and let municipalities know about it. So if everyone here thinks that's helpful, that's something we can do.
That would be wonderful. And if I could,
Absolutely.
my question for you, I really appreciate your spending time with us.
Oh,
this
absolutely.
morning. One of the pillars, as you were talking about your big three, it'd be really interesting to see your perspective on what I feel is a very robust underground economy in Pennsylvania. So both there's a contract world, there's a mechanics world, there's a food world, and all of that participation, not only from the individuals that I know that may be collecting unemployment
Right.
and on welfare, but also participating in these benefits. Yesterday, we were at a hearing for workers' compensation, which is just running out of funds for or uninsured workers. And in that hearing, they said individuals can claim they've been paid under the table for X amount verbally, even without those records, and they file a claim, they win the claim, but there isn't necessarily a referral to even hold them accountable or who their employer was for those past tax. Can you touch on the underground economy and ways that we might be able to tap into that, being the restructure, sales tax, whatever it would be?
I do know there's one area that we found in an audit, which was we audited the department. We audit, obviously, agencies all the time, but we audited specifically the cash assistance program at Department of Human Services, and we found a couple thousand people that were deceased still getting cash assistance because they weren't doing the cross-check with the Social Security system. And it was actually a pretty simple check. It saved, we're talking a couple $100,000 just by putting that check in, not meaning an actual check, but an additional step in the process to weed that out. While I was on the road yesterday, it did filter back to me about that hearing on the workers' comp. What we will do, and thanks for raising, because it puts a reminder in my head to go back with our team, and we should open up a discussion with labor and industry on that, and maybe that is something that we can look at for maybe doing an audit down the line, because the audit at Human Services turned out to be really helpful on cracking down on that way. It's because we know there's some people that need the help, and you want to make sure the help's going to people that need it. And I don't think whether you're liberal, moderate, or conservative, I think we all agree people that are deceased shouldn't be getting cash assistance. I don't think that's a bold political proclamation from me. I do think our audit of the unemployment compensation system helped this General Assembly come up with some reasonable reforms, which also then gave some members, and certainly on the Republican side, more confidence to put some money in, because some of those reforms were put in place to try to shore up the system. Maybe the workers' compensation system is the next one that needs to be tackled in that.
Out of that hearing, there was the suggestion of if potentially your office, the Department of Agriculture with the food selection, and the Department of Transportation, if they could begin to work together, just notification of here's a contractor or here's a food vendor that has been identified as not, right now I think it was a 305 or something, there was a form that they basically can just mail and say, hey, you're not participating in this program and you should, but they were missing the teeth. And so if the Department of Ag, who's walking through the fairs, is able to pull that food certificate, or the Department of Transportation pulls a license plate, and we could begin to connect these silos in a very positive manner that everyone would benefit. Again, it's not an R or D thing; it's a tax structure.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's similar to what we did with the Turnpike. When we audited them, we found we were the only state in the country. And so, by the way, you can be mad at me if you've gotten the brochure when you get your vehicle registration now, that if you owe any money on the Turnpike, you got to pay it before you can renew your registration. That was because our audit showed there was like $50 million in uncollected tolls, and we were the only state in the country that wasn't banging on people when they were going to get their vehicle. Now, again, some of that's out of state. We had to have a reciprocal agreement with other states. But again, we were the only state that didn't do that. Now we're starting to collect that money, and I have a radical idea. If you should pay the toll, you pay the toll. And so that new brochure, but something similar to is almost what you're suggesting here with the ag side, of which reminds me, I want to throw this on the table, which isn't about financial recovery, but I think it would be great for the rural community. Our school district should be contracting with our local rural farmers on a more on a more effective basis to get fresh fruit from our farmers into our schools. The schools want more fresh fruits. I think they should do it. We should be trying to tie that more into, in southern York County, southern Lancaster County, trying to get some of our actual Pennsylvania agriculture into the schools. I know it may be a little more expensive up front, but I think it would be better in the long term. And while it was on the top of my mind, I wanted to throw that out there.
Eric. I'm sorry, Jonathan.
Thank you, Representative Ryan. Auditor General, thanks for being here this morning. You spoke to the antiquated tax system. I think you referenced 1985. Makes me think of the 1985 Bears.
Well, yeah.
Continuing on the football theme there.
That 30 for 30 with about the 85 Bears is one of the best ones.
Isn't it
with Buddy
fantastic?
Ryan. It's fantastic.
Agreed. So along that theme, we have the 6%, we have the 3.07, we have the corporate net income tax, and the fact that perhaps we need to evolve given the new economy. Would you be able to share some of that opinion, some of that thought with us, and how we could evolve? And then there's a part B to that question. Would your reply have been different 2 months ago prior to the reaction to the tax reform on the national level, as opposed to what you're going to provide for an answer right now?
I'll answer the second one because I've never been asked that, so that's. Well, I'll probably be thinking of that answer because I think the short answer would probably be yes, but I have to sort of let that stew in my one side of the brain while I answer the other part. I think we should do, again, I think it should be done with study before we do it, but I think our sales tax probably is too high, but we're not taxing the internet sales. So I think probably some lowering of the rate and broadening the base of who gets taxed on that may be something to consider, because I think there's a lot of people now that just buy things on the internet, and I'm telling you, they're just not paying that sales tax at the end of the year. But I think that should be done in a way that's lowering the rate. So I don't think that should be done as something punitive. And again, I think it should be studied, but I do think there's a lot of revenue being lost from the internet sales. But on the same token, way to sort of level the playing field with the people that are actually paying taxes in Pennsylvania, putting their stores in Pennsylvania, is if you lower the rate for actual Pennsylvania businesses while tax internet sales. So you're doing that, just to be fair, and again, I'm just going to make up a number, you go from 6 to 4. You're now, in a sense, rewarding the in-state stores that are paying their employees here, putting their brick and mortar, paying their local property taxes, and at the same token, making sure that we're not losing the revenue to the internet sales. Because right now, I do think a lot of our brick and mortar stores that are in-state feel that they have an unlevel playing field against people that, against some of the bigger operators where they simply set up a mailbox in South Dakota, no offense to South Dakota, or Delaware, and they get out of paying that, their sales tax. I think that's something to examine. Again, I don't want to seem like, that 4% number is some magic number, but there's clearly something happening with the sales tax that needs to be examined. Also, I do think that we have to look at how we do the PIT, because I think sometimes when we think about the personal income tax, we only think about it as the individuals. But is it hurting small business at the rate it's at? Is there a way to get that to a more competitive balance so small businesses can feel comfortable doing more hiring? I think that's something that also needs to be examined. On the national level, I will tell you, there's so much smoke coming out of D.C. today that it's tough to take what any side says there at face value. I do think the best thing that came out of that tax reform was the repatriation. What I mean by that is rewarding companies for investing in the United States and not giving them a tax break for moving the money offshore. Just that alone is a huge win for the American people. Now, this may be my partisan hat, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that the tax cut for individuals expires and the one for the companies is in perpetuity. I would like to have seen just for me, if it's good for one, it's good for all. That's just my own, I don't even know if it's a partisan, that's just maybe sort of the guy that grew up in a neighborhood in Pittsburgh just doesn't like that side of it. But the best tax reform of that bill that no one's talking about is the repatriation side of that. With the Apples of the world now find it is to their tax benefit to invest in the United States. They probably were going to do that anyway, but now getting it here as opposed to somewhere else. And again, I have nothing against any other country. They should be worried about their country and et cetera.
Absolutely.
I don't knock India and all these countries for trying to lure American companies. That, to their credit, they've been better at it than us over the last couple decades. But I think that was the best part of the tax reform that almost no one's talking about. When you pick up the paper, now, let's be honest, we pick up our phone and we get our Google News alerts. When you see the Apple reinvestment, that wasn't actually because of the corporate tax rate coming down. That was actually because of the repatriation side of that. And I don't know if they don't talk about it because they just feel it's not as good of a message as saying we cut taxes, but actually to me that was the best part of that, and I think they should be commended. And I know President Obama fought for that and wasn't effective enough in getting that done. And so, sometimes part of politics is not only being for a position, but finding a way to get it done. And on that one, they got done.
Absolutely. Dave, do you have any questions? General, first of all, thank you again. I have a couple other comments, if you don't mind. In keeping with that thought process about the repatriation, what are some of the things that you think that we can do in the Commonwealth to make the Commonwealth a more attractive place for businesses to locate? Well, in addition to what you've already said.
I'm going to sound like grumpy guy on the porch here for a second.
Okay.
The idea, and by the way, we have to play in the game. But the idea that states spend taxpayer money to try to lure businesses from one state to the other is a joke. Now, we have to do it because everyone else is doing it. But it's I think, to me, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but if any president put me on the Supreme Court, I'll tell you right now, I think it violates the Commerce Clause. I think it's a joke. I think it's an abuse of American taxpayers. And if that ended, I think Pennsylvania would then be in a great position because our workforce and infrastructure is actually better than most other states. Having said that, because that's not going to change, we are at a disadvantage in a lot of the southern states because they have so much land that they're able to build them a highway, give them a plant, give them the land for free, and that's very tough to compete in the short run. So considering my ideal world isn't going to happen, I think there's a couple things we have to do. I think we have to do a better job of marketing our workforce. And in addition to marketing the workforce, I think we have to develop the skills of what the workforce is going to need. For example, the cracker plant in Beaver County, Western Pennsylvania, there are 500. And again, I keep saying 500. One time, somebody's going to eventually, Liz is going to eventually write me a notepad that's going to say it's 482, but you get the point. There's 500 open welding positions that are going to be jobs there for 10 years. And if you're willing to work the overtime, make $100,000 a year, and we can't fill them with Pennsylvanians. So before you cut one tax, raise to one tax, before any of that other stuff happening, just having 500 trained welders would have blue-collar men and women having $100,000 roughly, between 90 and 110, depending on overtime. That's a family-sustaining job in an area of the state that does not have a high cost of living. That is, I haven't broken down the numbers, but that same salary living in Philadelphia is probably the equivalent of making $400,000 a year. So having a workforce ready to meet the jobs, because companies are looking for skilled workers to do the jobs that they need done, and right now they got to go out to Oklahoma and Texas to find the people that take these jobs. And that's a shame on all of us, that we're all part of why we didn't have that ready. So to me, it's a workforce, and then with that, infrastructure. The biggest section of our economy is southeastern Pennsylvania. And I do think that we have to find a way to make our transportation in southeastern Pennsylvania easier. When I mean easier, I think there needs to be a long-range vision on this. Then you find a way to invest in it. Because if anyone here has driven into Philadelphia, and I don't want to get other than I love Philly, but we all hate that drive because no matter what time you're making it, it's a traffic nightmare. And I'm telling you, just from meeting with business leaders, that has an impact on economic development. So I think our infrastructure and our workforce are the two biggest things we should focus on. And on workforce, it's about making sure our workers have the skills for the future. We're actually doing a workforce development audit right now on state programs with this. But in the ideal world, I will say that this would all be a lot better if states got out of the business of using taxpayer money to try to lure companies from one state to another.
You might get a unanimous consent on that one.
Yeah.
We have 2 additional questions. Representative Tobash.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll give your voice a break just for a second. Hope you're doing okay. Thank you, Auditor General, for being here this morning. Hey, just real quick. So this is the idea. Here's a catchphrase in Harrisburg we're using all the time: recurring revenue, right? And then you make the comment that while we've grown, I think that we can do better on the growth side. We want to work on a lot of initiatives to do better on growth, and that is recurring revenue, except for the fact that you've talked about the fact that revenue's flat. So you got flat revenue, you've got growth, and you say, let's do a study, but you've done audits. So where do you think we start with this study? Like, where do you see potentially the low-hanging fruit?
I come back to the sales because one thing, when I say revenues are flat, that's the area where they were flat. We'd see growth in the economy, new jobs, so new income tax would come in, but you wouldn't see any growth from the sales tax. So that just did. So to me, I have my feelings about that, which I've expressed. But to me, like at a minimum, that's an issue. Whether my answer could be wrong, but that's clearly an issue. Look. We do we do a single audit of the state every year, and we do see that. And again, because we have to sign off, my department has to sign off sometimes on additional borrowing. I'm just telling you, the revenue stream of the state is not matching the spending stream of the state. It's just not, and that's even in this economy. So what happens if we head into a recession? Look, at some point, the growth started again in 2009, and here we are. We're almost a decade out on growth. Just by logic, at some point, we're going to hit a recession. If we're hitting a negative cash balance now, where the Treasurer has to float and send loans just for the state to pay its day-to-day spending during a growth economy, to me, I'm scared. I am scared about what happens when we hit a recession.
Okay, Dawn.
So two things I had. One, you said with the workforce development, which that's been one of my issues as well. You had said, we can compete with other states, and corporate welfare is a big issue with me as well. I think it, just sets us up. It's not fair, but we've got to compete, and that's what all of the other states are doing. But our workforce here, I don't think we can compete with the workforce, because I think that's another hindrance. But you thought that you said you thought that's where we could. Our infrastructure, our workforce, set us up where we could be competitive.
I do believe our trades are some of the best in the world. I do believe our trades both.
Oh, in quality?
Yeah, in quality.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no. There may be other issues that drive, but I'm on the quality side of it. I will put our trades, and I know that's union and non-union. I'll put them up against anyone in the world. I mean, they've built some of the best buildings, and they do it on time and on budget. And the union and non-union compete, and they want a fair fight, and all that other stuff goes. But I'll put our trade. I'm specifically talking about our trades. Okay. I'll put our trades up against anybody in the world.
Okay, good. That's a great clarification, because everywhere I've gone, it's the quantity.
We don't. The people we have are the best, but we don't have enough of them. Yes.
Correct. And so when we get to that whole, with education, where we're measuring our schools by how many kids we get to college, it defeats that whole skills gap.
Yeah, Representative, look, we're auditing this right now, and I'm meeting with, the Thaddeus Stevens of the world. We're meeting with community colleges. And this is a collective society issue. Who knows who's listening and may be used against me someday. I mean, whatever. But all of us are collectively responsible for the idea that everyone goes to college.
Absolutely.
That's not, the government didn't create that.
Oh, absolutely.
The government responded to every parent, not every parent, but a pretty big chunk of parents saying, look, I do think we need trades, but my kid's going to Harvard. And I'm exaggerating to make the point. That is a collective society issue that I think has to be addressed, because now kids, young adults, are going to college, coming out with not just $80,000 in debt, but $200,000 in debt,
right.
And they're taking a job that didn't require a college degree. And so even if the college degree is something they should strive for, and again, I think for a lot of people that is the right path, maybe it was working your way through it or going to a different school so that you're not coming out with all that debt. Because I will tell you, the one thing, and I won't even say it's a mistake, but when I came out of law school with $80,000 in debt, because I was able to pay for undergrad and grad school, but law school I wasn't. I came out with $80,000 in debt. I wanted to spend 1 year as a public defender and 1 year as an assistant district attorney, because I thought that would be the best way to get me in the court system and to learn how to be a good trial lawyer. When you have 2 kids and you got $80,000 in debt, guess what you're not doing? Working for $30,000 a year. And again, I don't think anybody should be belly aching for me. I've been, I've had about as much blessings as you could have, and I've been on a pretty good roll. But the point is, I know what that's like. I mean, when I came out of law school, that's what my goal was. And when you have that $80,000 in debt, that's not going to happen. But kids that are coming out with $80,000 in debt now from undergrad and are going to work at Starbucks.
Absolutely. I the same concern. And then the other question I had was auditing funds. So you went back, and I just take this back to Philadelphia, and you said, the traffic, the transportation, which is a major issue, and looking at that multimodal fund. And one of the things that our group did this summer was going through all those funds. And in the multimodal fund, I believe there was about $500 million sitting there between end fund balances and reserves. And then they go into commitments. So there was a hearing, and they brought all these things, and it seems like it's a kind of a cyclical pile. So they always have more requests than they do money, and it's getting that out. But if you dig down into those numbers, and I don't know if you already have,
I'm smiling for a reason, but I'll let you finish the question.
It looked to me that 80% of those dollars are going for sidewalks and lighting and paths and parks. That's not multimodal in my mind. I'm thinking SEPTA, CAT, Rabbit. I'm thinking transit, right? Brick and mortar. How can we get this infrastructure going? Not a trail path from a new housing development to a park. Not that that's not nice, but I think, as we prioritize on what we're doing, we've got to be very judicious with our limited dollars. And mass transit is mass transit. I don't know if you looked at it and how it aligns to the actual law.
I have to not answer because we're auditing that right now.
Wonderful.
So
I'll anxiously await.
Yeah.
We'll get a copy of that. Because of the time.
We have rules, so because we're in the middle of it, but I can't say one way or the other than we're auditing that right now.
Okay, that's great. Wonderful.
And I'm hoping that we can get a copy of the audit if it's available when it's finished.
Oh, when it's finished, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Hopefully you want to do more of it than one Scranton School District member wanted to use.
Well, that's one of the ones that we pulled out with our summer intern. And if I could, due to the schedule where they have to have another meeting in this, first of all, General, thank you so much. And for the viewing audience that's watching this, the purpose of this Financial Rescue Caucus is so that we can collaboratively sit down and talk about issues where it's a give and take of a discussion rather than sometimes done in a political process. We will be airing this. It's part of a segment that we've done. We've done one with the Independent Fiscal Office. We've done one as well with the state auditors. General, we just appreciate your time. I have a tremendous respect for you and your staff, and we want to thank you for being so willing to answer questions today.
Thank you. The whole team, we do great work, and I appreciate having us in, and look forward to continuing our great discussion and work with you to try to make this state even greater.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, General. Thanks to the members.